Monopolies are not efficient, and most governments then try to prevent monopolies, but they can't always prevent monopolies. So for example, like in tiny towns, there might be only one gas station. They're going to be a monopoly, right? Not much you can do about that. And then the other situation that cannot be prevented is when the monopoly is a natural monopoly. And we talked about this on at the very beginning of the chapter. And good examples are, say, the transit system, SkyTrain system, ferry system, ICBC. Well, I don't think ICBC is a natural monopoly. Anyway, but definitely the SkyTrain, the ferries, because they have a huge amount of expensive capital. And so it is just better to have a monopoly. It's less costly to have a monopoly. You just have one firm that is paid for one set of the capital. But then if you let them be a monopoly, they will charge high prices. And so you can't do that because then it's not efficient. It will cause deadweight loss. So natural monopolies is what we'll talk about now for a few pages here. All right. Now, what we said for natural monopolies, I think it was on page 2 or 3 of the chapter, the ATC curve is downward sloping rather than U-shaped. And that's because of the huge amount of fixed costs. So I'll just make a note of that. So just because the fixed cost is very large. And so then if you just have one firm, as that firm supplies more and more, then the average cost will just keep going down and down and down. Okay, so the average total cost curve then will go down. Now when we draw it on here, we want to show the average total cost curve going down. Like that. So you can show it crossing the demand curve. And now what we want to show is the marginal cost curve. Now this will be a little bit tricky. So marginal cost curve, remember usually it goes through the bottom of the ATC curve. So usually for average total cost, usually you would show the average total cost as U-shaped like that. Marginal cost is low, it brings down the average until the marginal cost becomes higher, and then it brings up the average. So it goes through the bottom. But if you have no bottom, then the marginal cost curve must just be below the average total cost curve. Now, okay, so we'll draw it. Now what you can do is you can draw it going up, but it would have to go up just a little bit, like just very gently sloping up, and not going up enough so that it crosses the ATC. At least not until after it crosses the demand curve anyway. Okay, so something like that. So it's going up gently, but not crossing the ATC curve. All right, you know what? I just realized I missed something on this page. Sorry. Let's just go back a page. I forgot to write in this sentence here at the bottom. Monopolies are inefficient because for the output between QM and Q star, let's cross that up. There. Remember, deadweight loss is missed opportunities, right? Where if the price consumers are willing to pay covers the marginal cost, then those units should be produced and consumed. But they're not, because that will not maximize the monopolist's profit. Okay. All right. Okay, so natural monopolies then. The graph will look like this. Okay, so the ATC curve is downward sloping rather than U-shaped. It has no minimum point. So the MC curve will not cross within. So now what you can see in the diagram is that if we continue drawing the ATC curve and the MC curve, that at some point they would cross over here. But the consumers don't want that much. So within the quantity that the consumers want, then they won't cross. Okay, so within all right, so natural monopolies create a unique problem then, because it's better to have a monopoly, yet if you let the monopoly be a monopoly, they will provide a smaller quantity and charge a higher price. So they will create deadweight loss. Okay, so let's just see what would happen if the monopolist was allowed to be a monopolist. Now, looking at the diagram, you can see that it is very similar to the previous diagrams that we've looked at. So say on page 9. So on page 9, everything's similar, right? The demand curve, marginal revenue curve, marginal cost curve. The only difference is this average total cost curve, where here it went down and started to go back up, and here it just goes down. And we'll see the problem that that creates in the next couple pages here. All right, so in the diagram, let's show what quantity would be efficient. So the efficient quantity would be the quantity, all the units, so all the units where the marginal benefit to the consumers is bigger than the marginal cost, and so that would be all the way to here. So this would be the quantity that would be efficient, that would maximize surplus, so that is Q star. Okay, so and that goes with the sentence up here. Efficiency or total surplus is maximized when output is at the point where the demand curve crosses the marginal cost curve. I'll put in brackets that we'll call that Q star. But that quantity is not the quantity that the monopolist will choose. The monopolist chooses the quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? So what they're looking at is not the willingness to pay or the marginal benefit to consumers. They don't care about that. They care about their marginal revenue. And they will only produce units where the marginal revenue for them is bigger than the cost, which is only up to this point here. And then they produce QM. They charge consumers the price of PM. At that point, here's their average total cost. So this is their average total cost there, and so then that colored in area is their profit. Great for them, but where's the deadweight loss? Deadweight loss is all the missed opportunities where the marginal willingness to pay by consumers outweighs the marginal cost of production. So you have this huge amount of deadweight loss. Okay, so this is called an unregulated natural monopolist. So this is natural monopolists being allowed to do whatever they want, which is to maximize their profit. They will produce QM, charge a price of PM. Profit is the difference between their price and the ATC times their quantity. Okay, so solution. Transit companies, the ferry system, electricity companies, are they like regular businesses? Not quite, right? So there's two options for trying to make the market more efficient. The first option is that the government can run the business. So in British Columbia, the government used to run the electricity companies and the ferry system and the transit system, and then they still run ICBC. What's the problem with government ownership? Are they very good at it? No, as we've seen with ICBC now. The ICBC is a big problem, right? So the government's not really in a position to run a business because they're just not very good at it. And then the other option is for the government to let the business be run by a private firm, but not let them charge the high price that they really want to charge. And so what we see that then with BC Hydro, with the transit system, with the ferry system, they are price regulated. So in other words, the government, they have to go through the government to get the price they want to charge approved, and then the government makes them show that they need to charge a certain price to cover their cost and blah blah blah. Anyway, okay, so let's just write that down and then you guys can take a break and we'll talk about it after. Okay, so solution is either public ownership, so that meaning the government owns and operates the business, or the government simply regulates the price. So, okay. All right, so we're talking about natural monopolies, which are different just in the fact that the average total cost curve goes down like this and the marginal cost is below that. And now we're going to see the problem that creates. Okay, so we're talking here about the possibility of public ownership. That means the government owns and operates the monopoly. Now, the good thing about that is that the government does not have to be concerned about profit. Their concern would be the citizens, providing the services that the citizens want, and they would provide the efficient amount then. So this quantity here, right? So as long as the marginal benefit to the citizens outweighs the marginal cost, they will provide the goods, so that will be up to there. And that's the efficient quantity, so that is Q star. All right, so yeah, so they will have prices set to maximize efficiency rather than profits. So the quantity will be Q star, and then the price is here. The price consumers are willing to pay at that point. And that would be P star. Okay, now there will be no deadweight loss then, right? Total surplus would be maximized because all the units for which the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost, all those units will be produced. However, this will be an operation that loses money because at this quantity, here's the price and here's the average cost. So that's the problem of having an average total cost curve that's going down and a marginal cost curve that is so low. The price at that point, which equals the marginal cost, will be so low that it's not going to cover the average cost. So think about, say, the SkyTrain, right? Most of the cost is building the SkyTrain. The marginal cost of letting one more person on the SkyTrain is like pretty close to zero, right? It doesn't cost much to let one more person on the SkyTrain. So the marginal cost is super low compared to what the average cost would be. And if you charge a price that's equal to the marginal cost, then it will be a very low price and it will not be high enough to cover the average cost. Okay, so at this quantity, that would be the price. Here's the average cost. So let's draw that over to the axis. Okay, so the rectangle that is formed between the average cost and then the price consumers would be paying, this is the loss. So this firm, owned by the government, it's only possible for the firm to be owned by the government because no private firm would, no person would be willing to operate a firm if it's going to be losing money. But the government can run a firm that loses money because they have tax revenue from other sources that they can use to cover this extra cost. Okay, so for a publicly owned monopolist, the output would be Q star, price P star, profit, none. So there's a loss instead. Which would have to be paid for through other tax revenue, and that's called subsidizing. Okay, so which would have to be subsidized. So the subsidy, the total amount would be the loss. I'll just make a note down here. So the loss would have to be subsidized. So the subsidy would be that rectangle area. So the difference between ATC and the price times the quantity. Okay, so the government can operate the firm. And then that would be best for citizens because the quantity would be as high and the price would be very low. But the government would then have to raise taxes on other things to cover the loss. And then the other thing about governments is that, as I said before the break, is that they're just not very good at running businesses, which we're seeing with ICBC right now. Right? ICBC is not a natural monopoly. I don't know why the government owns ICBC. But anyway, they've been losing money, right, because of mismanagement, right? The government's just not... the governments are never going to be good at running businesses the same way that a private firm is, because a private firm is motivated to make sure that they maximize profit and they've got their costs as low as possible, whereas the government doesn't really care, right? Everyone's on a fixed salary. Okay. Now, the other option then is to regulate the price. Let the firm be run by a private company, but regulate the price. And so this is what we do in British Columbia with most of our natural monopolies, right? The electricity companies, the TransLink, the ferry system. So they're all run by private companies, but they're not allowed to just charge whatever price they want. They have to go through the government to get their prices approved. Right? So you might see it in the news every once in a while. BC Hydro wants to raise their prices, or TransLink wants to raise the fares. Right? It has to go through the government. Okay, so price-regulated monopoly. So the government sets a price ceiling. So what they will allow for is the private firm to break even for sure. So remember, that means that the private firm is earning an accounting profit. They're just not going to be allowed to earn a high economic profit. Okay, so they will be allowed to charge a price so that they can break even and make an accounting profit. So where is that then? So the price has to equal the average total cost then, and that is here. Okay, so this point here. This is a point where the price that consumers are willing to pay is equal to the average cost. And so then that will be the quantity. Now this quantity and price, we use the superscript R for price regulated, PRQR. There. Okay, so we can see then that this will mean that they have to charge a lower price than they otherwise would and provide a larger quantity than they otherwise would. It's still not efficient though, because the efficient quantity is way over here. So it's not efficient, and it will still create deadweight loss. So the deadweight loss will be this triangle here between QR and Q star, where the marginal benefit to consumers is still bigger than the marginal cost of production. But they can't produce any more, because if they produce any more, the price has to be below ATC and they will lose money. So the only way to not lose money, this is going to be the lowest price and the largest quantity that they can charge and still break even. Okay, so this would be deadweight loss. All right, for a price-regulated natural monopolist, so output we say is QR, price, PR, profit, 0. Okay, so this means the firm will break even. And it's not efficient, but it's more efficient because the deadweight loss is smaller compared to just letting them do whatever they want. So on page 14, we showed what would happen if the government just let them do whatever they want. And in that case, they charged this price up here and had the smaller quantity, and we have this large amount of deadweight loss. Whereas now, the quantity is larger, the price is lower, so it's more efficient and there's less deadweight loss. So less deadweight loss compared to an unregulated monopolist, which is one that would just want to maximize their profit. Any questions? Yeah.
Why is the deadweight loss only considered from the consumer side?
No, it's not just the consumer side. Deadweight loss exists in any situation where you have these units of output where the marginal benefit to consumers is bigger than the marginal cost to producers, but those units are not being produced. So taxes will cause that, price controls, quotas, anything that makes the quantity smaller anything that makes the quantity smaller than Q star. All right, any other questions? Okay, exercise 3. Okay, so in this exercise, we are comparing an unregulated monopolist in the first question. Second question is a publicly owned monopolist. And then the third is a price-regulated monopolist. In all cases, though, it's a natural monopoly. And we know it's a natural monopoly just because of the ATC curve, the fact that the average total cost keeps going down, and then you have this very low marginal cost. Right? So the graph tells you that it's a natural monopoly, and then we've got 3 questions about the 3 options. You either let them do whatever they want, the government owns it, or the government lets the private firm own it and controls the price. All right, so first, letting them do whatever they want. Letting them do whatever they want. They will want to maximize profit. They maximize profit by only producing the units for which their marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost. So that will be here. So they would produce 8 units. They would charge a price of $11 that the consumers are willing to pay. And the question is, what would be the deadweight loss? Okay, I'll just outline it in purple then. So it will be where the marginal benefit is bigger than the marginal cost, but those units are not being produced by the monopolist. Okay, so if this is an unregulated monopolist, so first I'll put Q would be 8, and I'll put P would be 11. And so then the deadweight loss is going to be this triangle here. So let's see, so that is, I'll write it out. So the height of the triangle is 11 minus 3, and then the width of the triangle is 8, or 16 minus 8 times a half. So 8 times 8 times a half will be 32. Okay, then, next one, publicly owned monopolist. So a publicly owned monopolist is the government. And the government doesn't care about profit. They care about the citizens. And they will produce the good as long as the marginal benefit to the citizens outweighs the marginal cost, which would be all the way up to here. And so they will produce 16 units, and they will charge a price of $3. So Q will be 16, price will be 3. Deadweight loss, there's no deadweight loss. But they will lose money, so the firm would have to be subsidized because the price that the consumers will pay is 3, but at that quantity the average cost is 16. So, sorry, 16, 6. So this rectangle here would be the loss of money that the government would need to subsidize with other tax revenue. Okay. Okay, last one, price-regulated monopolist. So a price-regulated monopolist is allowed to charge a price that covers their cost. And so the price, meaning the price consumers are willing to pay, has to cover the cost, and that will be here. Use a different pen. So that will be this equilibrium here then. So where the price consumers are willing to pay, which is 7, will equal the average total cost, which is 7. And that will go with a quantity of 12. So there's no profit. But there is going to be deadweight loss because at this point, 12 units are being produced, 16 would be efficient. So these last 4 units here, the marginal benefit to the consumer still outweighs the marginal cost to the producer. And so you still have deadweight loss then because those last 4 units are not being produced. Okay, so that triangle then, 7 minus 3 times 16 minus 12.